again, I'm Carol Valente. I'm a Senior Policy Associate here at Energy Consumers Australia. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar we're hosting in partnership with the Sydney Community Forum. We have today 192 people registered for the session, and we're very, very glad that you all found time to attend this event and hear more about the insights from this incredible work with and for CALD communities. So you are one of the 192 curious and empathetic people wanting to deliver better outcomes for the nearly 1 in 4 Australians who come from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. And we couldn't be happier. It's actually a record number for ECA webinars. So yeah, thank you. So before we go any further in the discussion, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, live, and work today. And I also pay my deepest respects to all elders, past and present, of the distinct lands on which you are all on today. For those of us who migrated to Australia, either a long time ago or very recently, either as a choice or maybe a lack thereof, Australia is this wonderful place to have our home away from home because it's been cared for thousands and thousands of years by its first people. And it is the first people spiritual connection to these lands and waters, their respect for all elements of nature, their strong sense of place and belonging, and their rich and very diverse culture that makes this a beautiful place to live. And I've been living in the lands of the Gadigal and Wangal people of the Eora Nation for over 6 years now. I've been calling these lands my home since 2017, and I acknowledge that these always were and always will be Aboriginal lands. So this webinar today is the cherry on the top and final output of this research and engagement project that we called it a deep dive, done in partnership with the Sydney Community Forum. And with this project, we wanted to build the energy sector's understanding of the barriers that CALD consumers face when trying to interact and take part in the energy transition. We wanted to disseminate those ideas that have been developed by CALD people on how to support those CALD communities through an energy transition narrative that reflects their priorities, their concerns, and their needs. And we also want to inform policymakers' agenda and their future work to support more inclusive decision-making processes in the journey to net zero. So what do we have planned for today? Well, you get to hear from very passionate and dedicated people about the value of this project and its insights. We'll also have a panel discussion with very important people from ECA, from Sydney Community Forum, from Voices for Power, and from the UTS Business School. And we'll have time for Q&A as well. So we'll have time to take questions from you. So we encourage you to submit your questions during the presentation and the panel discussion via the Q&A feature in Zoom. So that should be in the bottom of your Zoom screen and with the 2 speech bubbles. And you can upvote questions. So if you think that some questions are interesting and should definitely be asked, please upvote and we'll be prioritizing those. So why this study? Firstly, because CALD households face that aggravated structural and systemic social economic disadvantage and encounter challenges in greater proportion than the average Australian household to take part in the energy transition. So they are more likely to be left behind. And this is because CALD people are more likely to be renting and living in shared households or apartments, or they are less confident that they know how to manage their energy use. They find it harder to locate and understand accurate and relevant energy-related information. And they are also more likely to think that it takes too much effort to make the changes to make their homes more energy efficient. And this comes from still limited and scarce research, but there is some research that already indicates that. So we need more research on the opportunities in those solutions. So last year, through our grants program, we funded the Queensland University of Technology, and Professor Rose Gordon is here today to talk about that, to explore what it takes for the energy industry to truly support CALD people to be more empowered energy consumers. So this project was a very robust project, and it involved narrative analysis of the energy policies and programs to understand any exclusionary practices, interviews and video ethnography with CALD people, and also a co-designed process through workshops to develop the guidelines in the toolkit. So I will soon add the link to the resources from this toolkit to everyone on the chat, and I thoroughly encourage you to have a read and share this with your colleagues as well. So adding to the QUT's work and also building on the fantastic advocacy through the lived experience that Sydney Community Forum has been done for a long time now, we have partnered with Asha and her wonderful team of CALD community leaders to better understand how we can make what these recommendations mean, how we can make that happen, how they can be implemented, and how this changes the day-to-day interaction that people have with the energy system, but also to better understand those additional barriers and to work with those CALD community leaders to develop the solution. So in terms of the project itself, Asha is going to talk a little bit more later this afternoon, but the name of the project is a deep dive, but the best analogy we could find is to actually climb a very high mountain together. And we had some principles for working together that really ensured that these the findings that we had were robust and valid. So the first thing was that we ensured that there was a safe and an equitable space for sharing and collaborating to happen. We were all there to learn from each other and to discuss the challenges and the barriers that the CALD energy consumers can experience. But we also wanted to flip those challenges upside down, to imagine what it would take to overcome them with innovation and creativity. So above all else, we approached this project with hope, optimism, and the belief that we can collectively enact change. And I'd now like to introduce you to Reverend Alimoni Taumoepeau. Reverend Moni is a founding leader of the Voices for Power. He's the acting director of the Mission Enablement Team of the United Mission and Education, and an intercultural ministry and climate action team leader. He was born in Tonga. He studied theology in Australia and has been a minister with Uniting Church for 25 years now, ministering in rural and urban congregations and offering ministries in prisons and schools. So Reverend Moni will share with you his perspectives on the value of this kind of work and his experiences as well. Over to you, Reverend.
Thank you, Carol, for that introductions. Good afternoon to you all. I wish to pay my respect to the Tuunga CALD people of the Darug Nation where I'm zooming from, the elders past, present, and emerging. I am one who committed to walk with First People towards reconciliation and forgiveness. For I believe our First Nation people, while displaced by our society, they do have knowledge and skills to share with us about how to combat climate change. As Carol mentioned, I'm a Tongan, migrated to Australia, married to Lani with two grown-up children, son Lemeki and daughter Natasha. It was after the climate march in 2015, we began to hear story after story of families struggling with the cost of living, in particular, the skyrocketed increase in electricity costs puts a lot of migrant communities on the edge of unaffordable energy bills. After listening campaign with many table talks, we realized that there's a gap in our migrant communities and something needed done. In 2017, Voices for Power was launched to raise the voice of the vulnerable migrants to the fore of political space, and the issue identified to empower local communities to push towards a transition to clean and affordable energy and net zero by establishing a community hub to help serve those vulnerable communities. For as culturally and linguistically diverse or CALD community members, we found ourselves becoming the most marginal voice in the conversation. Despite our unique perspectives and experiences, our voices are often overlooked or dismissed in discussions and decision making process related to sustainability and climate action. One of the key reasons for this marginalization is the language barrier that many of our CALD community members face. Important information and resources about energy costs and the transitioning to net zeros are often only available to English people, making it difficult for those of us who speak other languages to fully engage with the issues at hand. This lack of accessibility means that our insights and concerns would not adequately taken into account, nor benefited if there is help available. Additionally, cultural differences and varying understanding of energy systems and sustainability work also played a role in marginalizing CALD community members. Traditional knowledge and practices that could contribute to valuable insights of how to communicate and how to help the transition to net zero are often disregarded or undervalued in favor of more mainstream approaches. This leads to a sense of exclusion, alienation, and among our CALD community members who felt that their voices were not being heard. Add to this, systemic barriers such as limited access to education, employment opportunities, and political representation further marginalize CALD community members in discussing around sustainability and climate action. Without adequate support and resources to participate in these conversations, our perspectives are often sidelined in favor of more privileged voices. The result of this, our CALD community members finds we are on the fringes of accessing the critical help and contributing to the transition to net zero, despite being directly impacted by the effects of climate change, not only here in Western Sydney, where I live, but also in the Pacific region, Asia, and other parts of the world. How can you and I take action and address this marginalization? I suggest for us to consider that it is crucial to actively engage with and uplift the voices of our CALD community members, provide language accessible resources, and create inclusive spaces for our perspectives to be heard and valued in discussions around energy affordability, sustainability, and climate action. We recognize that Voices for Power campaign since 2017 must continue to progress forward. And I hope now with Deep Dive campaign that you may commit to at least hear and amplify the voices of all community members as we work towards a more equitable and sustainable future for all. Furthermore, CALD communities, like my children, are given fair treatment and access to help that they are entitled to. I wish you for a good conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Moni, for this. This was a very powerful and, short but perfect, discourse on this entire issue. And it definitely sets us up for a fantastic conversation and discussion. So thank you very, very much. Yeah.
Sorry that I'm not going to be there for the whole time, but I'll be listening on the way as I'm driving to Griffith this afternoon.
Absolutely.
Blessing to you all.
Thank you. Bye. Well, yes, fantastic. I'd now like to introduce you to Asha Ramzan, who's, besides being a force of nature, she's also the executive officer of Sydney Community Forum, a role that she has held since 2008. Asha has worked in various management, therapeutic, community development, and teaching roles in the community services sector since 1989. And she is particularly interested in the intersection of social marginalization and economic disadvantage, and how this impacts the lives of people from different cultural backgrounds in Australia. She's going to share with you a bit more about the deep dive, the methodology, and the key recommendations as well. Over to you, Asha.
Thanks, Carol. And thank you, Reverend Moni. He has so eloquently expressed how we migrants feel. I'm a first-generation migrant, also from the Pacific, of Indian background from Fiji. We are global citizens, but because of our marginal status here due to language barriers, cultural barriers, knowledge barriers, we are rarely asked what we know, what we think, what we'd like to know, and what the solutions are when it comes to energy equity and this transition to net zero. And yet we are impacted unequally by the extreme weather events we've been experiencing in Australia as well as back home. Our work with the Voices for Power project has been from the beginning, we've been leading that work. And the process that the Voices for Power project, which is a migrant community-led and driven project that engages with climate justice and energy equity, is premised on the idea that it's a strength to be multilingual. It's a strength to have lived experience of other cultures, other countries, other environments. And the co-designing and positioning of the energy consumer at the center of everything is core to this work. So when we decided to partner in this deep dive project, we took those values and principles to the deep dive, and the community leaders, 47 of them, came together. And at various points, a core group of leaders helped to co-design the actual deep dive questions and process so that it's very much been owned by the community. We met 3 times. There were 3 deep kind of discussions and surfacing and trying to understand how it means, how it is for people to live with extreme weather events and energy poverty. What are the barriers and challenges that people face, but also what solutions might work? And it was a really, really powerful experience for us. We've been doing this work for so long. We have an energy literacy program that's specifically designed for migrant communities and delivered by bilingual workers and funded by energy partners who believe in this work. But it was really exciting to see our leaders contributing to the solutions and really strongly putting forward what they felt was important in the consideration so that nobody is left behind in this transition to net zero. Many of the leaders are living the heat waves. My community is concentrated in Western Sydney and Southwestern Sydney. So when we talk about the extreme weather events, we're actually living that. It's not an intellectual exercise for us. So over those 3 deep meetings to discuss and listen and hear and unpack the range of communities that came together, they're from the following backgrounds, as you can see, truly diverse. We made sure that there was language support, and because of the deep trust that we have and the ongoing relationships with these community members, we were able to ensure that everybody could participate by having other people mediating and translating. Yeah, and so Carol, what did we learn? What did we hear?
Yeah, so as Asha said, so we had about, over the 3 workshops, we had about 47 CALD people providing their ideas and providing their solutions and brainstorming solutions as well. So I think that was really powerful. It was not something, I really want to emphasize that. So the recommendations in the report, they are not just coming from ECA and Sydney Community Forum. They come from the real people, everyone that use on the daily basis, that struggle to interact with the energy system every day, who have issues in accessing renewable energy. Yeah, so the recommendations come from those people. And very quickly, so we asked them, like, as kind of a icebreaker question, what would you like the Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, to know about you and your energy needs? And that's what you can see in the slide. So this was the first question that we had for them. And these are like some of the ideas and some of the urgency that was highlighted as well, as in, we matter, we want to be part of the discussion, we are here to work with you, and the transition needs to be equitable. So more specifically on the key recommendations that we have, speaking about some things that Asha and Reverend Moni were talking in terms of the complexity of the energy system. And this is something that, like, even for ourselves that work in the energy space, it's very hard to understand what's going on. And we have other research from ECA conducted by the Insight Center that demonstrates that consumers are being bombarded with too much and very complicated and uncoordinated information about what to do and how to reduce their bills. And it comes from the sources that they don't trust. And we know that trust is key in bringing everyone along on this net zero journey, and relying on the strong social networks that CALD people develop within their communities. And that's the non-traditional networks that Reverend Moni was referring to. This is the avenue for effective engagement. So the many migrant community associations, the local networks that we have across Australia, they are overlooked but very, very powerful trust channel to promote the engagement, inform, educate, and build the relationships with those CALD consumers. And that's why our first recommendation is for the Commonwealth to fund a mobile community energy hub. So Asha, do you want to talk a bit more about the community energy hub?
Absolutely. So we know to effectively engage with migrant communities, we need to go out to them. We need to be co-located in places that they congregate, in trusted places like their church halls, their temples, their mosques, the community centers, the places that they're familiar with, where they feel safe, respected, and don't feel the usual shame or embarrassment in not knowing things or sharing the reality that they're struggling financially or struggling with some of the challenges of being a migrant in a new country, learning about our system. So that we imagine that this is a minibus, that it says Mobile Community Energy Hub, it has bilingual staff, and it goes out and it's co-located in a calendar where once a month we will be at this mosque. And once a month we will be at, say, Auburn Community Church, Uniting Church, at their community hall. And we provide energy literacy training that day. We look at people's bills. We have other groups there, Service New South Wales, all of those groups that are wanting to engage with communities, but are doing it ways that are not working. I mean, this is the challenge. We continuously hear these are hard to reach customers. No, they're not. You're just not doing it the right way. And our communities came together and they told us, this is what we need. So the bus goes out, it goes out to Mount Druitt, it goes out to Marylands, it goes out to Campbelltown, and we work with those communities and we build the capacity, but we also build their engagement. And outreach, we know that when you work with migrants, when you work with Aboriginal community, when we work with poor communities, public housing communities, outreach is the tool and trust is the process by which you work in partnership. Yeah.
Yeah, so second recommendation, I'm sorry if I need to rush this a little bit. It's just because I really want to make time for the panel discussion and the Q&A. But yeah, so our second recommendation is about better communication practices, the quality of information, and the assistance that is provided to CALD consumers from the industry. So throughout the workshops, participants have shared that the information that they receive through their energy bills is too complex, it's difficult to make sense of, and it fails to offer insights or ideas in terms of prompting behavior change or helping them understand what they can do to reduce their energy bills. And the lack of that in language and the culturally sensitive materials, it further hinder CALD people's ability to make those well-informed decisions and can result in them missing out on energy saving solutions. So we see this opportunity for the industry and the energy regulator to work with the CALD community to directly address those barriers by either partnering with them to better understand what can be done, improving the diversity and the representation where the decisions are made, and encouraging the provision of timely and responsive interpreter services. Anything you would want to add, Asha?
No, I think you've covered it all.
Okay, good. All right, let's go to the third recommendation, which is about better housing for everyone. So as I mentioned previously, so CALD people are more likely to be renting or living in apartments and shared households. So which this limits their capabilities and their resources to improve the energy efficiency of their homes, or either switching from gas to electricity in the journey to electrification, or even installing renewable energy. So the workshop participants really singled out housing as such an important priority because it's social a determinant of health and well-being. And some of the participants even noted that a healthy home prevents illnesses. So there was this unanimous support for government-led regulation to improve the performance of our homes and to ensure that these homes can actually help people cope with the extreme weather events instead of exacerbating the harm. So yes, as you can see in the slides, the idea is that all the work that is being done through the trajectory for low energy buildings and all the partnership that the state and the federal government have to really provide a good foundation for better housing, more energy efficient homes for everyone in Australia, not just those that can afford to make those improvements, right? And lastly, our final recommendation is about all three levels of the government collaborating. So it talks a little bit about the issue of affordability. So as Asha mentioned, CALD people experience energy poverty, experience exclusion, and like many other cohorts of consumers across Australia, affordability has worsened across like most jurisdictions here, and particularly for low-income households. So CALD consumers, they are being asked to take lots of actions to help with the energy transition, but this is happening for, like with all Australians, this is happening at a time when cost of living pressures and the rising of energy prices are forcing everyone into financial stress. So CALD consumers, the participants in the workshop, really wants to see the three levels of the government partnering with the CALD communities to deliver accessible and tailored programs to support decarbonization efforts and lower bills for those that need it most, but that cannot do it on their own. So Asha, any final comments on this?
Yes, one of the things that struck me, Carol, when we were listening to the stories is that we have a tendency to blame individuals and families and communities for the problems that are actually structurally and systemically broken. If people are living in substandard housing, in those suburbs that have concrete jungles and no green canopy, and they have no way of actually changing their environment. They're in rentals. So, you know, I had a family tell me where there's overcrowding, 12 people living in a 3-bedroom house. They can't put up curtains because the landlord won't allow that. And so their energy bills are just beyond what I could even get my head around. $2,000 for a quarter, and they couldn't pay it. And so they were looking at borrowing money to pay that bill, but they would be further in debt because that would be the case in winter as well. So in summer, they were using portable air conditioners. People who have the least control over their environment have the lowest levels of income and are economically disadvantaged, work outside. So the young men in those families are working outside. They are being impacted by the extreme heat. They come home and they cool their homes down. They cannot afford their bills. They have no control, but nobody's listening to them. And these are the people that require targeted programs and partnerships with their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, really impressing, like how the lived experience shows on these cases, because that's the thing. When we hear in a report, oh, affordability has worsened, oh, things are difficult for everyone, it's one thing. But when you hear those stories that you share with the real people, I guess that's really powerful. And I really hope that this changes and this enacts change in the way that we do things. All right. Well, we're now time for our panel discussion. So I invite our panelists to turn their cameras on. I will make quick introductions to everyone, and then I'll start posing the questions. So we have Dr. Brendan French. Brendan serves as the CEO of Energy Consumers Australia. He is a leading consumer protection and dispute resolution expert with extensive executive experience across corporate, academic, public, and community spheres. We have Ibtisam Hammoud. So Ibtisam is a Voices for Power leader and community worker. She was born in Lebanon and migrated to Australia as a child to escape the civil war. She is a passionate advocate for migrant and vulnerable communities, and for the last 3 decades, she has been involved in shaping policy and projects that address social justice and inequity in our multicultural society. And we have Dr. Ross Gordon, who is a professor of behavior and social change in UTS Business School. Ross is an interdisciplinary behavior and social change activist. He's the author of the Toolkit of Recommendations supporting CALD Australians to be empowered energy consumers, the report that I shared in the chat earlier today. And his work focuses on social issues through a critical, reflexive, and multi-perspective lenses. So I will remind everyone, please add your questions to the Q&A. I do have a few questions which I will kick off this discussion with, but please add your questions as well. So I'll start with Ross. So Ross, as I said, you co-authored the toolkit. You did that incredible research, co-designing with consumers to better support CALD communities. So can you talk a bit more about the research and how the recommendations have been received so far by the industry, and if we already have good examples of positive change?
Yes, thank you, Caroline. So this project is really complementary, I think, to the deep dive project. So I think it's really great to see both of these packages of recommendations come out. I think what that does is create a kind of shift in their mindset in the Australian energy context regarding, you know, in the past we've said there wasn't the research evidence, there wasn't the guidance, there wasn't kind of the ideas of direction moving forward. We now have that with these 2 reports and these 2 important projects making these recommendations. So we had 3 stages to the project. We did a narrative analysis of existing energy market, you know, kind of storytelling and how those narratives are portrayed. And what we found when we did that analysis is generally there's this kind of persona created of an average, rational, white, well-off, highly educated energy consumer. And really the onus is on them to successfully navigate the market, be responsible and sustainable, and manage the energy transition successfully. So they're kind of individually responsibilized, but it's assumed that they are enabled and empowered to do that because of their positionality. We really didn't pick up any clear, connective representation of the diversity of the Australian population, and kind of narrative images that are created that represent and relate to CALD consumers. And that was certainly reflected when we went in to do ethnographic fieldwork with CALD energy consumers. They were just saying, look, our realities are, we're just trying to get through the week or the month. We've got to balance all these different tensions and, caring for family, being comfortable, kind of cultural practices around cooking and cleaning and other things, and rising energy costs. A lot of CALD consumers told us that they do care about environmental issues and sustainability issues, but they often can't afford to singularly focus on that when they're dealing with kind of other challenges. So really the story that came out of those two stages of research is you've got the dominant market narratives, which really don't relate to the everyday realities for CALD energy consumers. And we've also heard a lot about, the kind of lack of cultural relevance and competency, in language kind of communications and so on and so forth. And that really came through as well. So what we did is we took the findings from those two stages of research and embarked upon a co-design of the recommendation stage. So we brought CALD energy consumers and key stakeholders into the mix to work together to develop the package of recommendations. And those are what are reflected in the final report and the toolkit from the project. I think it's still early days. I mean, these outputs were only released towards the middle of last year. And this is a long-term commitment and a shift that we need in the Australian energy context to do these things. It's not a quick fix. It's not a box-ticking exercise. We really need every stakeholder and actor in the energy system to kind of commit to this seriously and over the long term. But one kind of more immediate indicator of traction here is I was delighted to see that the Australian Energy Regulator do refer to the toolkit of recommendations in their recently published customer engagement toolkit. So we need to do more of that. We need to distill these findings and recommendations from both projects across the energy system. And then I think we need to keep monitoring that success of the rollout of that process in terms of enacting the findings and kind of review and kind of reflect on how we progress over the coming years.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, hopefully the work from the deep dive and from this report can actually, go across every sector and every industry in the energy space to improve the outcomes for CALD communities. Yeah. So now I'll ask you, Ibtisam. So as you're a Voices for Power leader and you're also an advocate for social justice for CALD communities, so how do you anticipate that the recommendations that have been proposed, the 4 key recommendations, but also I would like to mention the report includes many others as well. We just focus on those key 4 ones in terms of let's not overwhelm everyone. But how do you anticipate that these recommendations will change people's health and well-being beyond their interaction with the energy system?
Thank you, Carol. I'd also like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Wongal lands that I'm meeting and joining from you today. Well, I guess too many times we've seen and heard in the news around how energy is impacting local communities, especially some of our seniors, with the heat and is impacting their health. They're having to be hospitalized, every summer. Health departments put out sort of tips to keep cool during the summer because they know many of them can't afford to heat their homes, and in winter as well, in heating up their homes in winter to stay warm, because as the speakers before me and Asha has mentioned, it does impact the health of individuals, impacts the quality of health, and being able to use up energy and in a more sustainable way. I guess does become challenging because it's trying to juggle sort of your health and well-being, but also affording the energy as well. So people are put in a very sort of tough situation there, and we also can't just put the emphasis on individuals and communities. As Asha mentioned before, there is a lot of structural, older style homes that are not energy efficient, and when people are renting these housing, they really don't have other options. So once again, it's looking at these recommendations will help improve that. At least it will encourage CALD consumers to take a stronger stance as well and be more involved in speaking up about what their energy needs are and feel that they do have a voice and can contribute, because for far too long, communities have just accepted what has been provided to them, and energy is one of those. I know growing up myself in a multicultural community, sort of in a family and in my local communities, is that a lot of the multicultural communities just accepted the bills and would pay it because they were fearful that the electricity or whatever it was going to be cut off, and then it's going to be even more expensive to reconnect. So they always tried to do the right thing. And we talk about sustainability. A lot of our migrant communities are experts in sustainability because where they've come from, they've grown up with living, frugally and conserving energy and foodstuffs and all that kind of thing. So sometimes I find it, I chuckle to myself that, they're talking to migrant communities about sustainability and energy, conserving energy and all that. All those practices have been practiced by generations of, migrant communities. So it's really more about empowering them to address the structural issues around energy and them being involved at the table in these discussions and how they've been impacted by them. And I guess it's we once again need to look at this issue from all sides, not just one, sort of specific, putting the issue back on the consumer. I guess it's looking at structural as well as consumers as well as energy providers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ibtisam. Great remarks. Yeah. I'm now going to ask you, Brandon. So as our CEO at ECA, from this leadership position, and you've been sponsoring and supporting this project since its inception. So I guess my question is, how do you wish these findings to reverberate across the energy industry? And in terms of what we have learned from this process of going through a specific cohort of consumers, what do we understand from more diverse consumers?
Well, thank you very much, Carol. I appreciate the invitation, and this has been the highlight of my week. I've been looking forward to this for days. Thank you, everybody, for dialing in. A couple of quick things. I think Australians could do well to be reminded that actually migrant communities were behind the rollout of energy infrastructure in Australia, and I'm old enough to remember lots of discussions of communities behind, for example, the Snowy scheme. That's going to happen again, right? And the critical thing that I've learned out of this piece of work and all the work that Asha and Ibtisam and others have done is to remind us that there are so many voices who need to be accommodated in the conversation. And at the moment, the conversation is way too narrow. And what we're seeing, I should be clear, is not just a challenge that CALD communities face in their current circumstances, whether it's billing or choice of supply, but also their opportunity to get the best out of the energy transition. Because what we do know, and what this report has demonstrated amply, is that migrant communities tend to live in housing of lesser quality, as Ibtisam mentioned before. We've heard yet again and seen regularly that CALD consumers are less likely to complain, less likely to switch between providers, and more likely, for example, to rent And so as a consequence, they have fewer options to put solar on their roof or to charge an electric vehicle if they wish to reduce their bills. And so the range of opportunities, as well as the range of current problems, actually combine to make it very much harder for CALD communities. Mm-hmm. So ECA, our job is to take these lessons and shout them from the mountaintops, both to government and to industry. And we've already begun doing that. I spoke to the CEOs of the energy retailers a couple of nights ago and mentioned this report and its findings. We will speak to it as well when we join the Energy and Climate Change Ministerial Council, which I present to all the state and federal ministers. And so we're really very much looking forward to amplifying the voices that we've heard here, but not just this once. What this has taught me is that it has to be a repeat learning. We have to engage, and to Asha's point, we have to get out into community. I'm a white male, well-educated, well-paid urban man. I'm sitting on a mountain of privilege. I recognise that. I have to use that. ECA has to use that to amplify this message into other people's circumstances so that they can broaden their perspective. That's really what all of this is about for me.
Yeah. Well, very true. And adding to your point, I guess, in the same way that the Sydney Community Forum has helped us connect and develop the relationships with their trusted networks of people, with their CALD community leaders, we will reciprocate that in terms of like connecting them with our stakeholders as well, doing this kind of work, as you say, amplifying the fantastic work that they already do. And maybe this is just the first deep dive. We intend to continue to do more as well and engaging with other groups of communities as well. So yeah.
Absolutely, we will.
Yeah. And Asha, I had a question for you, but maybe I'll leave it to the end. And we have a question from the audience. So Nina Collins is asking, what was the process of deciding upon the recommendations? What methodology did you use? And were there recommendations that were considered but left out?
So because this is owned by the community, the deep dive community, which is our migrant community leaders, and because they are leaders within their communities. And the thorough process, but the last 9 years of engagement meant that we went back to them. At every stage when something was documented, we checked in with them, we met with them, we asked them, does this reflect what you said? Have we captured it? This recommendation, does it reflect what was identified and voted on? People voted on the things that mattered to them. We didn't leave out things because we felt they were not sexy, or, the outcomes have been taken back and workshopped, and people have actually tweaked the language to reflect what they believe represents their needs and their concerns and their priorities. Yeah.
One thing I'd mention as well throughout the workshops, because as you said, we had 3 workshops. The first one, it was basically to explore the problem. So we divided the community, the CALD community participants into 5 groups, and each of them were given a story of like a fictional character that was very much inspired by all the testimonies and the lived experience that Sydney Community Forum has gathered. And on the second workshop, which we did it in person in Parramatta, the workshop participants had the opportunity to enact and role play what the future and ideal scenario could look like. And this was very, very inspirational, because that's where you could see the trust within the room and the willingness of the participants to let people know that they want, like, that's the solution that they want, and that's been described in there. So we took notes of the themes that were emerging, and in the last workshop, we refined all of those solutions, those practical ideas, and included them in the report. There was a voting process as well. So each workshop participant was given 6 tokens where they could distribute those tokens as votes in any or each or all of the priorities that they wished to be put forward. And yeah, so there was, I think in total we had about 31 recommendations, and a few had like the most votes, which were the ones that were included in as the key recommendations in the report. Yeah. Let's see what else. Was any further engagement with the Australian Energy Council and the Australian Energy Regulator carried out to help implement some of the recommendations in the report? Well, I can answer this one briefly. So we have reached out to the AER. So we spoke with the Australian Energy Regulator about some of those ideas as well, and we are looking forward to working with them. As Brendan said, in the AER's customer engagement toolkit, we have provided a submission to their work, and we are looking forward to working with them in the future. And regarding the Australian Energy Council, Brendan, would you like to give some comments? Yeah.
Look, thanks, Carol. Yes, I should say, first of all, I met with the online, I should say, with the chair and CEO of the AER during the week, and we had an agenda to discuss a number of things, including this report. That's going to be an ongoing conversation. I also went to Melbourne and presented to the council, the Australian Energy Council, which is the CEOs of all the energy retailers. Again, that was a Wednesday night in Melbourne for a couple of hours. And again, this was a topic that I discussed with them then and noted with the CEO of the council that we'd be in touch about how we might work to implement some of the recommendations. So we are moving these things forward, and we'll make sure that we keep everybody engaged and involved. We're a good bridge, if you like. So we don't want to be the mouthpiece, but we want to create the avenue for people to have the conversation. So we're very keen for the SCF and Voices for Power to, be part of these conversations and to really own their own recommendations.
Yeah. Okay. So just one, Kelly, I can see you have your hand up, but if you can please just write your question in the Q&A Zoom, that would be preferable. Yeah. And could you please tell us a little more about the ethnographic methods that are used? Thank you. So Dr. Ross Gordon, I think that's a question for you on the work that you did.
Yeah, I can happily talk about the QT-led project. So the methods that we use is we make an initial visit to people's homes as a kind of getting to know you process. And we kind of chart a bit of an energy narrative with them, a kind of background regarding how long they've been living in their home, what's the family composition, how do they use energy, what sort of energy practices are they most commonly engaging in their home during, summer, winter, and so on. And then that kind of starts to build up a little bit of a kind of background into, kind of their lives and lived experiences. We then follow that up another 2 times over a course of a few months. So the second visit to their homes, we do a kind of video ethnography. And what we do is we actually ask them to kind of recreate everyday energy use practices. And that's really useful because it picks up the kind of use of materials, the kind of routine in which they perform energy practices, and some of the things that you don't get from spoken interview or survey kind of research. So they reenact the most commonly or most important practices to them in their household. And that's usually 2 or 3 different things like cooking or heating or other kind of leisure practices. And then the third and final interaction is we come back after we transcribe the footage and we talk to them a little bit about what's in the video. We watch the video together with them and then interview them about that. Where they explain what's going on, why do they do things a certain way, and what's the kind of interpretation and meaning that we can take from that. So it's really designed to kind of get a deep dive and a kind of deep and meaningful insight regarding their lived experiences. In that last stage, we also then spoke to them about the kind of dominant energy market narratives that were distilled from stage 1 of the project and asked them to comment on how that related to their own practices. And that's where we saw that real divide. And then feeding into the stage 3 co-design workshops, we also asked them what their ideas might be around better support and intervention to better support CALD Australian consumers in the energy market. And some of those ideas were then carried forward into the development of the recommendations through co-design.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much for this. And yes, please, everyone, have a look at the links that are in the chat. There is the main report with the toolkit of recommendations, but there's also a more comprehensive report on the findings specifically, right, Ross?
That's right, yes. Yeah. So there's a shorter toolkit, which is kind of bite-sized and very kind of infographic based, and then the longer report, which goes into more details.
Yeah. Well, we only have time for one more question. So I have one here which has 1 vote, so I will prioritize this one. So, did you ascertain the financial burden in numerical terms experienced by the participants in the study as a result of not knowing their energy rights? I'm going to throw this one to Asha, but I'm pretty sure, like, throughout the project, we didn't necessarily get people's energy bills to understand that, but through the Voices for Power and the Energy Literacy program, you have a lot of information on this, right, Asha?
Yeah. So to date, we've trained over 2,000 people over 3 years in energy literacy. It's the trainer program, and it's co-designed by the migrant community leaders in a deep process. Ibtisam's one of them. So there's that work behind the scenes of building trust, listening, and then coming together, putting some questions, developing some ideas about what is needed in that energy literacy program. And then the energy partners contributed to that as well, retailers and distributors who've partnered to fund the energy literacy program. And then we brought everybody together in the co-design process. And we needed to really build the confidence and the voices of our migrant community leaders. Many of them don't have the confidence to negotiate with Anglo middle-class people in corporate jobs, right? So we needed to really demystify that and support them to really hone what they felt was a priority. In the process, we were able to understand that what we think or what the energy sector thinks migrant communities need or want to be energy literate is actually not how it is. That you need to design something with the community that's the target community, and to do it in a way which is culturally safe so people don't feel stupid asking questions, and also that builds on existing strengths and capacity and challenges the misinformation and disinformation that they might have. So that process has been deep, it's been long, 9 years of working with the diversity of the migrant community in Western Sydney and Southwestern Sydney. In some areas, the migrant population, the demographics is about 95% migrant. In some areas, it's the average, around 35%, 30%. But in Western and Southwestern Sydney, you're looking at above average representation of migrants from a non-English speaking background. Some are really highly concentrated in terms of poverty, in terms of marginalization, English literacy, and really large populations of particular groups all concentrated in an area. So our engagement with them is deep and it's lengthy, so the trust has been built. And I'm a first generation migrant, as is Ibtisam. So, you know, we share our stories so that people feel that we and know that we can be trusted. We demonstrate that. So yeah, so the choice of people and the ideas that came out of that was through a deep trust relationship. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Asha. This brings us to a close, actually. Very great way of finishing up the webinar. So thank you, everyone. Fantastic discussion. Thank you for your time, availability, your passion. Thank you, Asha, on behalf of the entire Sydney Community Forum team, especially mention to Nirmal, Gijo, Reverend Moni, and Ibtisam but also all Voices for Power leaders and participants in the project for working with us and for sharing so much wisdom about how to develop those trusted relationships. Thank you, Brandon and Carrie, who's doing the backstage work today, for sponsoring, believing, and supporting this project so much. Thank you, Professor Ross, for sharing your thoughts with us today and for being available to chat. I also want to thank the Thriving Communities Partnership, especially Kira, Alana, and Pat, for helping us during the concept phase of this project. And finally, a special thanks to every one of you in the audience. Thanks for taking the time. It's a Friday afternoon. Thank you for posing the questions. Thank you for your interest. I'll try and get a hold of all the questions. And if there are any questions that we couldn't answer, we'll try and share the answers in maybe later in the week. And please access the Insights report and the QUT resources. There's a link, there's a QR codes that you can scan and access the Insights report. And one thing, the webinar is being recorded, so you will soon receive a link to it for our YouTube channel. And finally, if you want to keep up to date with all ECA's work and find out when we are hosting other webinars, please scan the QR code on the right to sign up to our newsletter. So I guess this is it. Hope you all have a lovely weekend, and thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.